Hey guys, so today is my second finger. My middle finger just really delayed on that one. Hey guys, so today's video is a video where we talk about more updates, I guess. I don't know if this isn't kind of related, but it kind of is. It's to do with Trisha Paytas. So she went on a podcast the other day and it was strange to say the least. I kind of wanted to discuss that podcast as well in just one way or another, but it's just weird. Here's Phoebe. She was asleep this whole time and now that I start filming, that was a big yawn. Now that I'm filming, she's not. Oh my god, look at you, you're adorable. Oh yes, okay. Go lie down, have fun. Have fun. Are you gonna lay here on my leg? Okay. So there's a BFF podcast, which is between Dave Portnoy and Josh Richards. So Josh Richards is one of those TikTok boys who dances topless and girls go crazy for it. And Dave Portnoy is the guy behind Barstool Sports. And we recently saw him come into our side of the internet because of the Call Her Daddy situation with Alex and Sophia. But he did a podcast with Trisha Paytas, which I clicked on it and it had a bad like to dislike ratio. It was about 14,000 likes to 6.4 thousand dislikes. Now, I thought that was because people just didn't want an interview with Trisha Paytas. Like, I thought it was because she's problematic. But then I thought about it, and Dave Portnoy is a controversial figure on the internet, so I don't think that would be the case. They say some pretty controversial things on that podcast. I don't think that would be the case. What happened was I went into the comment section and everyone actually thought he was really rude to Trisha Paytas and treated her like she was not worthy of respect or research or things like that. So people actually stuck up for Trisha, and then Ethan actually spoke out on this, which I'm going to get into. So what happened was they kind of have like they talk for a bit before Trisha comes on, and then this is after the blowout with Frenemies, but before the Dr. Drew episode. So that's why, for context, it's kind of like that. They address H3 calling him a weirdo. There was a Frenemies podcast where Ethan called Dave a weirdo for being 43, I believe, and having a podcast with an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old, while also having like no clue about anything to do with social media. Anytime they bring up a name, that he's like, and what does that person do? And what they do? Like, what's the tea with that? So it just kind of seems weird that he's got this like social media tea kind of a podcast while being 43, having no clue about social media, like social media stars, and having it with an 18 and 21-year-old. I mean, do I think it's like illegal, creepy, anything like that? No, but it's a bit weird. It's like, just find a topic that you actually are educated on and do a podcast about that with people that are also educated on that topic. Don't, start a podcast about something you have no clue about with teenagers, or young adults. So they addressed that. I think Ethan called him like a 50-year-old and he was like, I'm actually 43. So, Phoebe. So then it kind of gets a bit weird because they mock his eye twitch, which, if you guys don't know, Ethan has Tourette's. He's kind of like on the lower scale of Tourette's. I'm pretty sure if you've watched a few podcasts, you kind of noticed it's a twitch that Ethan has. It is Tourette's. It's an actual, condition. And to get back at Ethan for calling him a weirdo, he essentially uses his Tourette's to call him a weirdo and be like, you would be the kind of guy that like would basically like take kids in a van and kidnap them or something. Like, that was basically the vibe. Trisha Paytas actually then backs Ethan up and says, I think that's actually Tourette's. That's why he has that twitch. And then it kind of gets a bit awkward. It kind of seems like, because they're on the topic of, obviously, Dave's trying to defend his podcast with an 18-year-old, I feel like it sounded like I said 19, 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. She then starts to backpedal on hanging out with minors, because I think it's like really awkward, the whole thing. She's like, I don't actually mind if people hang out with minors in like a professional setting where it's like, like business matters, or like, I mean, on movie sets you have adults hanging out with minors. It's like, why was it an issue for James Charles to hang out with Charli D'Amelio then? If you don't think it's a big deal and you think it's okay as long as it's a business transaction, which I think, as much as James and Charli probably really get along and they probably are friends, I think the core of their friendship, correct me if I'm wrong, is probably the fact that they make TikToks together, they film videos together, they are in the same industry, they make content together, which to me sounds like a business relationship, first and foremost. And then second, it's a friendship. Same way as you have colleagues at work. First and foremost, you are colleagues, and then you are friends outside of work, but you spend most of your time at work being colleagues, right? I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. So it just kind of seems like she starts to backpedal on this whole James Charles. She literally called him like she called him in paraphrasing. She tried to not make it sound like it was illegal, but she was really definitely making it sound like it was creepy. So why are we now backpedaling? Is it because it's like awkward to say to someone's face that it's weird that they're filming a podcast with someone basically half their age? They go over the Charli Dixie James Charles drama, which we've already addressed. She addresses using the R slur, and then I believe Josh Richards actually then just repeats the R slur, and I was like, this is really weird. This is really weird. Why is this happening? And she excuses it because she believes she is the R slur because she has mental health issues, but still, I don't know. It's a touchy situation. I'm gonna just swiftly move past that. They address the scandals, which there are quite a few of, and then they go over Paris Hilton being kicked off TikTok. So then they go into her OnlyFans, and what mind-boggling to me is, well, no, I get it, but it's those numbers are mind-boggling to me. She makes anywhere between $150,000 to $1 million a month from OnlyFans alone. Wish that was me. So then they kind of say, like, you know when someone says something and they're not saying it directly to insult you, but because it applies to you, it technically is an insult to you, if that makes sense. Like, for example, I'm an immigrant in the UK, and sometimes someone will know I'm an immigrant, but then say something really bad about immigrants as a whole, like generalizing immigrants. So even though they're not saying like, oh, you're a bad person because you're an immigrant, they'll like generalize other immigrants, which is therefore an insult to me because I am an immigrant. Does that make sense? Basically, they start talking about like how much would it take for them to start OnlyFans and all of that stuff. And then they go, well, OnlyFans is kind of like a last resort. Like you'd have to really look at like your reputation and stuff. I was like, and she just kind of sat there. She was like, I mean, yeah, I guess it's like a last resort. Oh, and I felt so bad. I was like, what? And then she was like, yeah, I think I'll only do it for like another year or something because I'm in a stable relationship and I just think it's a bit like weird at this point to do it with other people, and doing it alone isn't fun, and it just got really awkward. Anyway, then they bring up the David Dobrik beef, which we've, discussed. Then they do like a game of they put up names on the screen and ask if she would cancel them, and I thought that was really interesting. So that was the tea I want to get into. So they put up Jeffree Star and she said cancel. They used to be such close friends and she rode for him right up until the end. Like, so even through all the stuff that was coming about Jeffree Star, when the whole Dramageddon was really popping off, all of that was happening, she was still really going hard for him. And then, that video came out how he apparently used to make fun of her like acne behind her back, call her fat behind her back, like say really disrespectful things behind her back, and that's kind of where the tide turned. But it still kind of seemed like she was friendly with him because she was still reviewing his makeup and stuff like that. And now she said he should be cancelled. She was like, called me fat and made fun of my acne, cancel him. I was like, all the other stuff wasn't enough. It's like, when James Charles like, was the 95 not enough? With me, it's like, was his criminal behavior not enough? They put up Addison Rae and she says cancel, and then she misrepresented what Addison Rae said about fame. So she said that Addison Rae said she's like too famous for people, essentially, in like a podcast. What happened was, in a podcast, she explained how difficult it is to grow so rapidly on a platform and feel like the only people you can be friends with are people on that platform because no one else really understands, and it's very difficult to navigate the world of as a young person who barely just understands life as a whole. And it just felt like she really just like lied. Like it wasn't even a misrepresentation, it was just a lie. It wasn't, oh, I'm too famous for people. It's very difficult to navigate this world while being a young person just navigating life and finding people who you can also relate to but who you aren't just friends with because they're famous. It's like a big thing for people in the industry where they're like, you want to have friends because you actually like them, but then you also want friends that you can talk to openly about the problems you're going through while they and have them understand what you're going through and be able to give you advice and trust. So it was just completely misrepresented what she said, and that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So she says that she would not cancel the D'Amelio sisters, which was really weird to me because it seemed like she went really, really hard on like Dixie and Charli. Not really that hard on Addison Rae, except for that podcast she once filmed. But now she's like, cancel Addison Rae, don't cancel D'Amelio sisters. But then she explains it as she would cancel Addison Rae because she thinks she's capable of a career somewhere else, like off TikTok. But she doesn't think that the D'Amelio sisters are talented enough to have a career outside of TikTok. So she doesn't want to cancel them because it's like their one thing that they have. Really weird explanations there. I don't know if I agree with either one of those explanations. She then goes over James Charles and she says that he's cancelled, he's disgusting, that he takes no accountability, that he gets things wrong all the time, and that he's friends with a 16-year-old. She also calls him a pesticide instead of a parasite, which I thought was hilarious because they actually asked her to clarify. They were like, what what is he? And she goes, pesticide. And I was like, absolutely. So then they do Shane Dawson. She says not, that he's a good person, he's apologized. He apologized for the things that were very convenient to apologize for. He did not apologize for the stuff that came out after that apology video. You know, because it was like, he was mildly being called out. He did the apology video because it was like, oh, I can explain this stuff. Because he's already apologized for all that stuff before. So he was like, easy peasy, I'll do it again. And then it amped up. The Smith family got involved and he was like, I can't even explain this anymore. I'm going to leave for a few months. She says she would cancel David Dobrik for obvious reasons. They've had some like beef before. Well, it was kind of like a one-sided beef because David Dobrik doesn't really get involved in beef. Nikita Dragon, she says not because she thinks she's a nice person, that she hasn't done anything problematic, which... okay. And the only thing she mentions is the Tony Lopez stuff, but she doesn't think someone should be cancelled by association to someone else, which I half agree, half don't agree. I mean, if you're literally a child, which Tony Lopez is, he spoke to minors. At that point, I think if you're a criminal, there should be some level of like, why are you hanging out with this person? You know, yeah, it's kind of like people that hang out with Jeffree Star, who is like essentially a criminal for multiple different things, you know, sending stuff without people's consent to websites, you know, all sorts of things, criminal activity. I just think at that point, why are you hanging out with a criminal? Then they put up Tana Mojo on the screen. She says not. Alyssa Violet. There was recently a TikTok that Trisha filmed about Alyssa Violet where Alyssa did that very cringy thing where like slim women will be like, oh, well, when you look like this, you also look like this. And they like hunch over and there's barely any fat. And it's just cringy because it's like, it's not really doing anything for the body positivity movement. You just look silly. But I don't think it's like a cancelable offense. I think her intentions were pure and her intentions were genuine. I just think execution, not the best. And Trisha really went at her. She was like, you know, this isn't body positivity. This isn't making me feel any better about myself because you're a slim girl that is still slim, even when you're hunched over. So it's like not really doing anything for showing diversity in physique. But she says that she would cancel her for that, which I thought was like a very weird cancelable offense. Like, you're not cancelling Shane Dawson, you're not cancelling Nikita Dragon, but you are cancelling Alyssa Violet, who's basically stayed silent apart from this situation. She just... execution wasn't the best. Then she said something really dumb because she said she would cancel Alyssa Violet for that one singular offense, but she would not cancel Jake Paul because he's misunderstood and he's really humble in person. Okay, Trisha. Then they'd go over like, what's one piece of scandal that you would take back and what's one piece of scandal that you still stand by. And she says that she would take back the trans video because as much as she still stands by what she says, I think she says that she, like, people refer to it as gender fluidity rather than transgender. So she says she's kind of like uneducated on what she is and she's still kind of unsure. So she would take that back. But then she would not take back the dissociative identity disorder video that she filmed, which is interesting to say the least. So then H3 have an After Dark podcast where Ethan and Ela go over kind of like things and they do like an After Dark episode. So they talk about how Trisha Paytas, when she was done with the podcast, she like reached out to Ethan and said she was like really upset by kind of what was said to her in that podcast. Like a lot of times they were just mocking her. Oh, there was that part where they mocked her like past. Like she brought up her past as like an 18-year-old doing kind of inappropriate things on the streets for money. And then they brought that up later on to kind of just be like throw it in her face. Like when they were talking about Addison Rae and Charli and how they have a career that's successful and she kind of started out kind of like that and they didn't. It was like really weird to throw that back in her face. They go over how obviously Dave made fun of H3 Tourette's and kind of Josh, I believe, like took part in that Dave does literally no research and knows nothing about social media, like nothing. When people bring up like names, oh, James Charles, Shane Dawson, he's like, I don't know what these people did, I don't know what they're doing, I don't know who they are, I don't know what the situation is. Dave called Ethan weird and a creep when he's literally a 43-year-old with 18 and 21-year-old on his podcast. Like, it's kind of weird. They have no leg to stand on. He says how he did no research on Trisha Paytas, so like when she brought up stuff, he just was completely unaware. They brought up how she went on like America's Got Talent and he was just completely unaware of like what the clip was. When the clip's literally 30 seconds, he could have just watched it before the podcast started and he would kind of have an idea of what there was. But it almost seemed like they all had like a first impressions video, just like watching it for the first time. They were like, oh, interesting, you did that, that's cool. And then they obviously mock Trisha Paytas for her past, even though she brings it up kind of freely. She's like, here it is. But just because someone brings something up freely doesn't mean you have to disrespect them for it. That's just kind of my 2 cents on that. I just think the podcasts were interesting because there are a lot of things about Trisha Paytas that I don't agree with, but I also think like every human being, she deserves human decency. And I think to throw stuff back in her face, not do research when you invite her on as a guest, like whatever you think about Trisha, if you invite someone as a guest on your podcast, it's just respectful to do the research on them and then not throw stuff back in their face. Mainly when it's stuff that's like not problematic to other people. Like what she did in her past affected her and her only, and it's her business. No need to throw that back in her face. I just think a lot of the stuff Trisha said was kind of like, she kept on flip-flopping back and forth. So like she would cancel James Charles because of a few things along with hanging out with a 16-year-old. But then she, earlier in the podcast, says that she doesn't mind when there is like a business thing happening between a minor and an adult because that happens on set all the time. So like I do think James and Charli are friends, but I think they're friends because they are business. They have like a business relationship first and foremost, and then they're friends because they actually like hanging out with each other. But I think first and foremost, they make content together. I think with YouTube, it's such a blurred line, which is why I think there's always the whole like social climbing thing. They're not actually friends. Like, yeah, just like any other workplace. I feel like sometimes I'm guilty of doing that as well. I'm like, oh, they're not actually friends. They don't like each other. Because I feel like YouTube is so much more, maybe not now, but for a long time was so much more authentic than, and it still is more authentic than mainstream media because it's real people talking about real stuff most of the time, just showing their real life, real interests. And I think because of that, we sometimes think and assume that these people always are showing the authentic, real stuff. Like for example, Sister Squad, right? James, Ethan, Grayson, and Emma. Was that a true friendship, or was that a friendship by business first? Like business first and foremost, friendship second. I don't know. We'll never know, right? So I think with this whole like calling James a or like there's something wrong with him because he's hanging out with a 16-year-old, when in reality, she's there with her sister who is an adult. So there's adult supervision. Her parents are there most of the time, which is also adult supervision. So it just seems like she flip-flops whenever it feels right. With the Addison Rae stuff, I don't think Addison has done anything to really be cancelled for. I think Trisha just finds her annoying and is like, cancel her. What, because you find her annoying? I find that on the internet to be a big prevalent thing. It's like, oh, this person annoys me. Let's just cancel them. I think it's what happened to James Charles being by Sister. I genuinely think people found him annoying and they were just looking for any reason to cancel him. And I think we were all guilty of that. We were all guilty of finding him a bit obnoxious at the time, a bit too full of himself, and we thought, let's humble this 19-year-old. It's so awful, and I'm laughing because it's so awkward. It's like, oh yeah, people just found him annoying. And I think Trisha finds Addison Rae annoying because Addison is the perfect girl. She's pretty, she can dance, she's rich. I recently, there was a TikTok of someone who went to school with Addison, and when I tell you, she was that typical American girl that I imagine in my head, like the popular girl from the movies. She was in her little picture for school in like an album, and she had like a blowout and like really long hair, and she had her like perfect makeup done, and she was like, she is the epitome of the popular girl in school. Epitome. She was on the cheerleading team. There is pictures in like the yearbooks of her doing her little cheer stuff. She's such a popular girl. I can't relate. But it's just like, I think because of that, Trisha finds her infuriating. It's weird that she then said she wouldn't cancel the D'Amelio sisters because, like I said, you made about like 100 TikToks about them, called them all sorts of things, called them out for all sorts of things, rightfully or wrongly so. I just find it really strange. And then obviously the hypocrisy between cancelling Alyssa Violet for one misstep and then not cancelling Jake Paul for being a nuisance on the internet. Really strange tactics to me. But I'm glad Ethan, backed her up with Dave basically just not respecting a guest on his podcast. I think the moment you invite someone to your podcast, if it's not like a call out, like you're arguing on the podcast and you invited them purely to argue, if you invite someone to your podcast, have the common decency to do research, not throw stuff back in their face, and just, have a civilized conversation. I just think none of that happened on that podcast. I'm just not a fan. It's called the BFFs podcast, and I think maybe I just haven't watched enough of the podcast's episodes. Maybe if I watched some other ones, I would have like a different opinion. But just as a first impression of this episode, I'm kind of like on the fence about it. If you guys enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, comment down below anything you want to comment down below, and subscribe because I post videos every time something happens. So hit that bell, you'll be notified when that's happening. Social media links, any of the links in the description. I'll see you in my next one. Bye guys.